evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Christie's and to this evening's sale of Impressionist and Modern Art. Lot 11 is the 1922 Picasso there, Buste Femme à la Chemise.
A Picasso painting torn from a German museum wall has resurfaced at auction in New York City.
$4,800,000, $4,900,000, $5 million, and $5 million, $6 million, $6,200,000, $6 million too. No, all done, and selling here then. Last chance at $6 million too. For you, sir, $6 million too, thank you.
The last time this Picasso was at auction, it sold for just $1,800 as part of a campaign to rid Germany of artwork condemned by the Nazis. Adolf Hitler purged art he hated, and he stole art he coveted.
The Nazis were not just the most systematic mass murderers in history, they were the greatest thieves. They stole everything.
Art of all kinds would be vulnerable to Hitler's plan. Paintings, sculpture, furniture, religious objects.
There's always been looting. There was planned looting done by Napoleon, but this was really industrial.
Along with looting, the Nazis unleashed a modern war that destroyed historic European architecture. In the struggle to defeat Hitler, the Allies would have to choose between saving lives and causing even more damage.
There is the age-old argument, which is of more value, a work of art or a human life.
Today, even after more than 60 years, lost art is still being found, battle damage is still being repaired, and stolen masterpieces are still caught up in bitter disputes. All of this is the unfinished business of the most destructive war in history.
This painting in Vienna, it's their Mona Lisa. This is their icon.
This is one of the most important images of Austrian art of the 20th century.
The painting was stolen by the Nazis during the war.
Today, the fate of Gustav Klimt's portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer still hangs in the balance. The painting can be seen at the Austrian National Gallery in Vienna, but it is one of many works of art whose ownership has been contested since the Nazis wrought havoc on the art world. Most people call this Viennese icon the Gold Portrait. Few think of it as a portrait of a Viennese Jew, and a reminder of the Jewish community that flourished here before World War II. When the Nazis occupied Austria, they stole the Klimt portrait from this building, then the home of Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer, a prominent Jewish art collector.
The Nazis commandeered the Bloch-Bauer home, and the various representatives of the museums came together and picked out paintings and porcelain and sculpture that they wanted for their collections. This is the document that sent the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer over to the Austrian gallery. And at the bottom of the document, it says, "I sign with Heil Hitler."
For years, Adele Bloch-Bauer's niece has been fighting a legal battle with the Austrian government for ownership of her aunt's portrait and 5 other Klimt paintings her family once owned.
I grew up with the paintings, so that when people ask me, do you remember the paintings? Well, yeah, every Sunday for lunch we were there, and the Klimt paintings were all in Adele's room. My uncle commissioned Klimt to paint the portrait of my Aunt Adele.
Adele and Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer were major patrons in Vienna's vibrant modern art scene before the war. Artists from all over flocked to Vienna to take part in the modernist revolution. While Klimt worked on Adele's portrait, 3 young artists were applying to Austria's top art academies. Egon Schiele, and Oskar Kokoschka both went on to become accomplished modern painters. The third was an unknown 18-year-old named Adolf Hitler.
Schiele and Kokoschka were accepted and Hitler was not. And Kokoschka always said jokingly, imagine if Hitler would have been accepted and I would have been rejected. I would have run the world quite differently, and he couldn't have done that harm that he did, being a bad painter.
In its basement archives, the Center for Military History in Washington, D.C. stores many Nazi paintings. Among them are early watercolors by Adolf Hitler.
He was a mediocre painter, not terrible, but clearly not gifted. He thought himself gifted, though. He certainly thought himself able enough to have been admitted to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and he took it as a real rejection. Many of the jurors at the Academy were Jewish, and I suspect that this fueled his anti-Semitism.
Generally, he hated what was going on in modern art as a would-be artist himself. There were Jewish artists around, heaven's sakes. Not only that, some of those figures looked like they were wild black Negroes from Africa. How come people like Nolde and Kandinsky can be shown and all this to do about them, and they don't let me shine as an artist? It must have riled him.
In a 1937 speech, Hitler shouted, "We will from now on lead an unrelenting war of purification, an unrelenting war of extermination against the last elements which have displaced our art." Hitler began with a purge of German museums, ordering them to cleanse their collections of some 16,000 works by modern masters like Matisse, Van Gogh, and Picasso. Hitler labeled all such works degenerate. Modern art was then ridiculed and condemned in a hugely successful degenerate art exhibit that toured Germany. And the best of the German museum's collections of modern art were auctioned off at fire sale prices to benefit the Reich. Thousands of purged artworks were simply burnt. Germany was destroying its own standing as a world leader in modern art. Hitler commissioned his first public building for Nazi Germany, the House of German Art in Munich. There he would display contemporary paintings and sculpture that glorified the Third Reich. It would be a museum for the new fascist art, overseen by Hitler himself.
It was actually very unusual for a head of state to get this involved in cultural matters, but it was all part of his really racist ideology that everything had to be pure down to the last detail in Germany. Hitler would go with the curators of this thing and choose what was going to be in it. Year after year it went on right till the end of the war. And it was all for sale, but most of it had to be bought by the government because nobody really wanted it.
With the annexation of Austria in 1938, organized looting of Jewish property began on a massive scale. Even the German party leaders were surprised by the anti-Semitic fervor of Austrian Nazis.
The Austrians, they talk now about being the victims. They were never victims. Of course, there were some that were against it, but the overall was a royal welcome. Everything changed after March 11. It became a different life, a different city. When the Nazis came, they threw us out of the apartment, and the Gestapo men took the apartment for himself. We left Vienna. At that time, I didn't even think about what we are leaving behind because we only thought of saving our life.
The portrait of Maria's Aunt Adele by Gustav Klimt was just one of hundreds of artworks left behind when the Bloch-Bauer family fled Nazi Austria. After agents for Hitler, Göring and other Nazi officials chose what they wanted, the rest of the collection, including the Klimt paintings, was divided up among the state museums of Vienna. Some were returned to the family after the war, but the Klimt paintings still hang in the Austrian National Gallery.
I think there's a general understanding that these paintings belong simply to Austria. And we have reason for this. It's written down in a document. It's written down in the last will of Adele Bloch-Bauer.
Maria's aunt died in 1925 and left behind a handwritten will. In this will, she asks that her husband give the paintings to the Austrian gallery upon his death. And what happened was, of course, that the paintings were taken from him, stolen by the Nazis before he died.
Adele's husband escaped to Switzerland in 1939 and died in exile after the war. He never got the Klimts back.
After the war, the Austrians decided not to return the paintings based on the claim that under Adele Bloch-Bauer's will of 1923, they had the right and title.
It's very, very clear that she always had in mind that these paintings should come at the end of the day to the Austrian gallery.
The paintings belonging in the museums, they have to be seen by the public, but not in Austria when they keep them there under a lie. What upsets me so is the total injustice that they don't admit that they are not theirs.
Today, the struggle over Adele Bloch-Bauer's portrait is just one of many such disputes still unresolved in the wake of the Nazi art looting machine. Linz, Austria, Hitler's provincial hometown, would be the site for the enormous Führer Museum. Hitler planned to turn Linz into the cultural capital of Europe. Starting from sketches he drew in his youth, he ordered his architects to prepare secret plans to remake this small industrial town into a grand imperial city.
In the town of Linz, he visualized an avenue up to the front, left and right, of different buildings, and I call it Hitler's Acropolis.
The Linz project is really connected to Hitler's legacy. There's going to be an opera house, a symphony hall, a great library. There's also going to be a mausoleum with his tomb. And at the center of the Linz complex is going to be the greatest museum, not only in Europe, but in the entire world. Dozens of galleries that would hold thousands of artworks.
The collection was for the state. Hitler thought the Reich should have a great art collection for prestige. This is going to be on a very big scale.
He is prepared to purchase the artworks, of course, but he has really no compunction about stealing them. This museum is going to be created both by purchase and by plunder.
Hundreds of Polish artworks were on Hitler's wish list, but for the Nazis, most of Poland's Slavic cultural patrimony wasn't worth stealing. Because the Nazis considered the Slavs, like the Jews, to be subhuman, Polish culture was declared degenerate and marked for destruction. In the capital Warsaw, even historic architecture was targeted, particularly the Warsaw Royal Castle, home of the Polish kings for 6 centuries, seat of the parliament, and a national treasure.
Mamy wielkie lustra, tak zwany fryz, widzicie, to jest ten ozdobny, sztukateria dookoła sali.
In 1939, Hitler ordered his forces to kill, without pity or mercy, all men, women and children of Polish descent and language in the invasion and extermination of Poland.
I teraz wyobraźcie sobie, że wszystko to jest rekonstrukcją. Tu padły pierwsze bomby, niszcząc tą salę.
During the attack on Warsaw, Hitler personally ordered the shelling of the royal castle. He had been told of a Polish anthem that said, "As long as the Warsaw Castle stands, Poland is not yet lost." Damaged by shelling and stripped bare of art and furniture by Nazi looters, the castle still stood as the Germans took over Warsaw. But knowing the Poles' deep patriotic attachment to the castle, the Nazis bored holes in its foundation and filled them with explosives to create a permanent threat of complete destruction.
I drugi etap zniszczenia zamku to było w czasie powstania warszawskiego i po powstaniu. Wielkie Powstanie Warszawskie wybuchło 1 sierpnia 1944 roku.
After years of oppression, the people of Warsaw rose up to take back their city from the Nazis.
Najbardziej zacięte walki i najdłuższe walki trwały o Stare Miasto.
The Germans crushed the uprising, killing more than 200,000 Poles. And the Nazis made good their threat. The dynamite charges that had been placed 4 years earlier were detonated, destroying the Warsaw Castle completely.
Czasami pada takie pytanie, dlaczego zamek został odbudowany przez Polaków? Odpowiadam, z tej samej przyczyny, dla której został zniszczony przez Niemców. My, społeczeństwo, naród polski nie mógł żyć bez zamku.
In Krakow, the heart of the old city was preserved. Krakow was home to the art masterpieces most coveted by the Nazis. And here, systematic looting would begin in earnest.
Oczywiście ten ołtarz ma wielkie znaczenie, zwłaszcza dla Krakowa. Ten ołtarz jest po prostu, on zniewala swoją maestrią wykonania. Proszę popatrzeć na te postacie, na ich rozchwiane szaty, prawda, na ich takie wyraziste bardzo twarze.
Weizsäcker was a Bavarian who came to Krakow early in 15th century. For this altar, he used as models his neighbors from here. So it was a shock for Krakowians when it was opened. They saw the normal, regular faces of their neighbors being now saints, apostles.
The Nazis believed that all Germanic works of art should come back to the fatherland. And among these was the Wittstoss altarpiece. Now, it didn't matter that it had been commissioned for the church by the King of Poland. The thing that was important was that it had been done by a German artist and therefore should not be in the hands of a of an alien race, which was the Slavs.
The Poles had dismantled the 13-metre-high altarpiece and its life-size wooden figures and hidden them in the countryside. But within weeks of the invasion, the Nazis had tracked them down, and the altarpiece was shipped to Berlin.
It was a true loss for Krakowians. They were so accustomed that it belonged to this place that they couldn't find the way to their prayer without it.
Meanwhile, Nazi art plunderers looted hundreds of Poland's other masterpieces. They were compiled in an elaborate catalogue meant only for the eyes of Adolf Hitler. At the top of the list were Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine, Rembrandt's Landscape with a Good Samaritan, and Portrait of a Young Man by Raphael. The three priceless paintings were part of a small private collection in the museum in Krakow, owned by a noble family, the Czartoryskis.
W przeddzień II wojny światowej to jest zawsze, w przeddzień każdej wojny, ogromnie trudna decyzja dla właścicieli, którzy posiadają tej klasy zbiory, czy zdecydować się na ukrycie ich na miejscu, czy zdecydować się na ewakuację. Jeden pomysł wywiezienia, drugi pomysł ukrycia jest tak samo zły. Wiadomo, że...
The Czartoryskis decided to hide the paintings at their country estate, 160 kilometers outside of Krakow.
The objects were brought down here to this cellar and placed in one of the alcoves, which was then walled up and covered over with plaster. Unfortunately, the comings and goings did not escape attention, and when the Germans arrived, they broke down the wall, and of course, being soldiers, what they took was all the gold objects. They left the pictures lying around on the floor. The Leonardo actually had a boot mark on it.
The three paintings were intended for Hitler's Linz Museum, but the new Nazi governor of Poland kept them in his private apartments in Krakow. After the war ended, the Leonardo and the Rembrandt were returned by the Allies to the Czartoryski Museum in Krakow. The Raphael has never been found.
If this Raphael were to come up for sale at auction today, it would be $100 million, definitely. It has a strange quality of fascination, and so that's why I suspect it's still out there somewhere.
W tej bazie danych oczywiście obrazem najcenniejszym jest portret młodzieńca Rafaela.
Inside the Polish Ministry of Culture, Monika Kunka and her colleagues have compiled a database of artworks stolen during the war that are still missing. The program contains 59,000 items, estimated to be just a tenth of Poland's total loss.
I dopóki nie będziemy mieli rzeczywiście wiarygodnych informacji, to pozostaje nam tylko i wyłącznie publikowanie zdjęcia tego obrazu i czekać chyba na następne pokolenie. Osoba, która bezpośrednio brała udział w rabunku, ta osoba odchodzi, jej dzieci, jej następcy nie mają już tych obaw, nie mają świadomości, skąd to pochodzi, w związku z tym decydują się na sprzedaż i wtedy rzecz dopiero może ujrzeć światło dzienne. Także teraz to, co nam pozostaje, to tylko czekanie.
Perhaps the most celebrated collection of art ever assembled under one roof, at the Louvre Museum in Paris, spans more than 12 kilometers of galleries and contains over 400,000 priceless works of art, the cultural patrimony of the people of France. After Germany conquered Poland, the French feared that Paris would become the next target of Luftwaffe bombing raids, and sitting at the heart of the city was the Louvre. Museum staff gathered around the winged victory of Samothrace as the museum director gave the order to evacuate the great treasures of the Louvre to castles outside of Paris.
Les équipes du musée s'étaient préparées. En fait, on sait que dès 1936, mais surtout en 1938, il y avait eu des exercices d'évacuation, essayant d'imaginer comment pourrait se passer une évacuation en cas de guerre.
Within hours of the evacuation plan being announced, the Louvre became an enormous packing yard. Since many of the museum staff had been called to the front, volunteers were recruited from all over Paris to help pack, from secretaries to shop workers to truck drivers. The greatest challenge was moving the 2,000-year-old winged Victory, which now had to descend the long staircase on her way to safety.
J'imagine très bien l'esprit dans lequel cette œuvre a dû être retirée. Je pense à certainement une très grande tristesse de la part de ce tristesse, mais aussi sentiment de la prudence nécessaire pour essayer de préserver un des chefs-d'œuvre que le Louvre conserve.
Cette victoire ailée qui a l'air d'un bloc, elle est faite de centaines de morceaux. Et la descendre des marches au sommet desquelles elle règne, c'était un travail terrible parce qu'on s'attendait à ce qu'elle se brise en 1000 morceaux.
An eyewitness later recalled, the statue rocked onto an inclined wooden ramp. We were all terrified, and the silence was total as the Victory rolled slowly forward, her stone wings trembling slightly. The curator of sculpture sank down on the stone steps, murmuring, "I will not see her return." "37 convoys of 8 trucks each departed from the Louvre, leaving the vast museum virtually empty. In May 1940, the German army swept through Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and into France. It was a shock to the French, who had prepared for air raids, but not a full-scale invasion of their country.
All the works of art had to move in really chaotic conditions, along with millions of refugees who were on the road. There would be a truck full of Louvre paintings, and next to it would be another truck from the French treasury full of gold bars, and the government ministers speeding by in limousines. It was just total chaos, and the miracle is that the French collections really did survive almost intact.
The Mona Lisa had her own vehicle. She was put in an ambulance that was specially sealed to maintain a constant level of humidity.
There was a curator who rode in the ambulance with her, and it was so well sealed up that the curator, when they opened the ambulance, was unconscious, but the Mona Lisa was absolutely fine.
The Mona Lisa and other Louvre masterpieces arrived at castles and abbeys in the south of France. They would be periodically moved throughout the war to stay a step ahead of the Germans. The curators lived in the castles alongside the artworks. One married couple brought along their teenage daughter.
Mes parents leur avaient confié la Joconde, qui était un des rares, peut-être même le seul tableau du Louvre à avoir sa chambre à elle. C'est-à-dire qu'elle était dans une caisse de bois précieux. Et alors on ouvrait, et dans du velours ou du satin rouge, elle souriait.
Six weeks after the start of the invasion, France fell. Germany now controlled most of the European continent. The day after France surrendered, Hitler secretly flew to Paris before dawn, accompanied by his architect Albert Speer. It was his first and only visit to the city.
Der Führer trifft zu früher Morgenstunde überraschend in Paris ein und besichtigt bei seiner Fahrt durch die Stadt auch La Madeleine. Der Triumphbogen. Ein Blick auf den Eiffelturm. Links vom Führer Professor Speer.
Hitler remarked to Speer, "It was the dream of my life to see Paris. I cannot say how happy I am to have that dream fulfilled today." Hitler told Speer that he had often considered destroying Paris. He ordered his architect to resume work on his grandiose plans for the rebuilding of Berlin. When they were completed, he said, "Paris will only be a shadow, so why should we destroy it?" Unlike his harsh treatment of the Slavic cities of Poland, Hitler preserved Paris as a sophisticated playground for German military officers. The Nazi high command enjoyed the pleasures of the city and bided its time over looting from the French.
The Nazi authorities knew that these works that they wanted on their hit list were in chateaus, but they refrained from seizing works in state collections. The Germans didn't want to antagonize the French or to incite open rebellion.
They did not have the resources to control every corner of France at that time. So the takeover of France was much more gradual.
First they would steal from the Jews, and then later they would acquire the works that they wanted from French state collections. There were a number of notable Jewish collections in France. Paris was the capital of the art market, and one had these great art-dealing dynasties, and they had huge collections.
A month into the Nazi occupation, Gestapo teams raided the galleries of the 15 leading Jewish art dealers.
The Seligman family was right up there among the top dealers in Paris. This is a photo of my father before the war, when he started his business. Goodness. My father specialized in old masters, and Goering visited the gallery in 1938 before the war, and my father actually threw him out of the gallery because he knew who Goering was and what he was trying to do. So as a result, that was the first gallery they looted during the war.
The amount of art stolen from Jewish collectors soon grew so large that the Jeu de Paume Museum in the center of Paris was requisitioned for storage. The operation would be overseen by the anti-Semitic task force, known as the ERR. The Nazis made sure to keep up the appearance of legality. According to the new occupation laws, Jews who fled or were deported to death camps were stripped of their citizenship. The Nazis could then declare their property ownerless and available for plunder. Inside the archives of the National Museums of France is a volume of handwritten notes which traces the journey of the 16,000 paintings stolen from Jewish Parisians during the war. Compiled in great secrecy, it notes each work that entered the Jeu de Paume and the name of the family from which it was stolen. It is the work of Rose Valland, a dedicated curator who is today considered a heroine of France and certainly its most unlikely spy.
Au début de la guerre, Rose Valland a une quarantaine d'années. Elle occupe un poste relativement modeste au musée des Jeux de Paume. L'excellente idée de Jacques Jaujard, qui est alors directeur des musées nationaux, est d'essayer de tout faire pour maintenir Rose Valland sur place aux Jeux de Paume. Il faut s'imaginer Rose Valland, une femme qui n'est pas très grande, elle a un chignon tiré, elle a ses petites lunettes, elle est vraiment insoupçonnable. Et en plus, ni elle ni Jacques Jaujat n'ont prévenu les agents de l'ERR qu'elle parle allemand. Donc cette petite souris grise qui peut bien se faufiler dans le bâtiment, personne ne s'en méfie. Et en même temps, elle va pouvoir regarder, écouter tout ce qui se passe là.
Nobody knew that every night when she went home, with her remarkable memory, she kept a secret diary of what French paintings, owned publicly or privately, were taken by whom, sent where.
Rose Valland managed to stay at the Jeu de Paume, despite the constant danger of deportation or execution. In November 1940, she became concerned about unusual activity at the museum.
Rose Valland noticed there was great excitement that the pictures weren't just being inventoried, but all of a sudden they were being hung up on the walls, and there was clearly going to be a party or an opening of some kind, and indeed there was, because Goering himself came to the Jeu de Paume to see what was available for his collections and for Hitler's. He, of course, was clever enough to know that major works, such as Vermeer's Astronomer, which had been confiscated from the Rothschilds, should go to the Führer for the Linz Museum. But still, this opened up many possibilities of items that he could then take himself.
Over the next few years, Goering would visit the Jeu de Paume 20 times, taking over 700 works of art for himself.
Hermann Goering spent a great deal of time in Paris. Sometimes there's a disconnect. The Battle of Britain is raging, and Hermann Goering, overseeing the Luftwaffe in their critical moment, is taking breaks in Paris where he's visiting art dealers and restaurants and nightclubs, drinking champagne and eating oysters.
The loot from Goering's pleasure trips to Paris, the Netherlands and Belgium was shipped to the door of his palatial hunting lodge, Karinhall.
Karinhall is Goering's country estate, which was built outside Berlin. It was also the primary repository for his art collection.
It started off as a rather woodsy chalet, and it was very homey. It had a big fireplace, and it had a lot of stone built into it. But gradually it grew in size, and he redecorated, and it became utterly opulent and ostentatious.
It was added on to, and there were massive galleries, vast corridors with marble and tapestries and rugs and paintings and sculptures. I mean, we're talking about a collection of paintings alone that was probably about 1,700 paintings. As a comparison, that's more than the National Gallery of Art's European paintings collection.
Historian Nancy Yeide is trying to compile the first complete inventory of Hermann Goering's art collection. One of Yeide's goals is to locate paintings looted by Goering that went missing after the war, including a small painting by François Boucher, stolen from André Seligman in Paris.
We were looking for this Boucher, and we were surprised to find an image on the Utah Museum of Fine Arts website that matched the lost Seligman Boucher. The Utah Museum had no idea that this was a confiscated and unrestituted picture.
Well, I first became aware that the Boucher painting was found when a woman came to see me. And she said, we found a painting of yours, and it's in a museum, and they're willing to cooperate.
A painting stolen by Nazis and recovered in Utah is going home. The story coming up on 2 News.
The museum's executive director calls it an important day.
The art loss register provided evidence that we did not have rightful ownership, and on that basis we initiated the decision to return the painting to the rightful heirs of André Seligman.
Good morning. I'm the daughter of André Seligman. This is a very emotional day for me. We are very excited to get this painting from the museum, and they have been really, I can only use the word adorable about this.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
You know, my father would have wanted me to have this painting
And it's just a shame that he didn't live to see any of this going on.
Well, I was a little sad when I began to think about returning the painting. It's been an important part of our permanent exhibits, but I also saw the larger moral responsibility. We can't make amends for the millions of lives that were taken, but we can do something, simple, return something stolen, and confer a little humanity back on all of us.
In occupied Paris, trains packed with stolen art continued to leave for Germany. More than 22,000 items will be shipped to the Reich. But the theft of fine art was just the beginning. Now, the ERA began a new, more radical project.
À partir de mars 1942, l'ERR décide qu'il faut procéder à l'action meuble, la Möbelaktion, c'est-à-dire le pillage radical des appartements laissés derrière eux par les Juifs des pays de l'Europe occidentale.
The Union of Parisian Movers was forced to supply 150 trucks and 1,200 workers a day to help carry out the operation.
C'est donc un pillage comme on en a rarement vu, puisqu'il est radical et puisqu'il prend à la fois des objets de valeur et des objets qui n'ont strictement aucune valeur. Donc c'est un objectif matériel, mais c'est aussi dans une perspective de disparition d'un peuple et de sa mémoire.
Alors vous voyez, ici, tout a changé. Ici, il y a les grands moulins de Paris. Et là, ce sont les entrepôts où nous avons travaillé.
Jacques Altman, a young Parisian Jew, was about to be deported to a death camp in Poland when he was held back and transferred to a new slave labor camp set up at a train station in the center of Paris. At the camp, Jewish prisoners were forced to sort, clean, repair and pack stolen Jewish belongings that were then sent to families in Germany.
C'est pour ça que les nazis ont choisi cet endroit-là, à cause des embranchements des rails de chemin de fer qui allaient vers l'est. Ils amenaient des gros camions à l'intérieur de la cour. Là, c'était nous, c'était des détenus comme nous qui déchargeaient les camions. Les tableaux étaient triés. Il y avait des experts en tableaux avec nous. Ils triaient les tableaux. J'ai aussi aperçu parfois des officiers allemands qui venaient choisir tout ce qui les intéressait. Comme ils étaient certainement connaisseurs, ils choisissaient les tableaux de valeur qui étaient exposés. C'était une période très difficile. J'avais perdu toute ma famille, mes parents, tous mes frères. Nous étions une famille de 5 garçons. Un jour, j'ai reconnu des affaires de mes parents. Et là, j'ai vu les photos, j'ai vu nos meubles. Ça m'a fait comme un choc. Et parce que comme il y avait plein de valises, et j'ai ramené aussi des valises, j'ai pris une valise et j'ai rempli cette valise le maximum de photos. J'ai pris ma mère quand elle était jeune, j'ai pris mon père quand il était jeune. J'avais même des photos quand ils se sont mariés à Prague. Enfin, tout ça, je ne l'ai plus. Hein. Quand j'étais déporté à Birkenau, il fallait tout laisser sur place et tout a été détruit. J'ai perdu tous les souvenirs de ma famille.
As train after train rolled eastward, carrying Jews to concentration camps, others followed, loaded with their property and works of art.
evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Christie's and to this evening's sale of Impressionist and modern art. Lot 11 is the 1922 Picasso there, Buste Femme à la Chemise.
A Picasso painting torn from a German museum wall has resurfaced at auction in New York City.
$4,800,000, $4,900,000, $5 million, and $5 million, $6 million, $6,200,000, $6 million too. No, all done, and selling here then. Last chance at $6 million too. For you, sir, $6 million too, thank you.
The last time this Picasso was at auction, it sold for just $1,800 as part of a campaign to rid Germany of artwork condemned by the Nazis. Adolf Hitler purged art he hated, and he stole art he coveted.
The Nazis were not just the most systematic mass murderers in history, they were the greatest thieves. They stole everything.
Art of all kinds would be vulnerable to Hitler's plan. Paintings, sculpture, furniture, religious objects.
There's always been looting. There was planned looting done by Napoleon, but this was really industrial.
Along with looting, the Nazis unleashed a modern war that destroyed historic European architecture. In the struggle to defeat Hitler, the Allies would have to choose between saving lives and causing even more damage.
There is the age-old argument, which is of more value, a work of art or a human life.
Today, even after more than 60 years, lost art is still being found, battle damage is still being repaired, and stolen masterpieces are still caught up in bitter disputes. All of this is the unfinished business of the most destructive war in history. By the summer of 1941, Hitler had Western Europe under firm control. Now he looked to the east to expand the Nazi empire even further. In a surprise attack on the Soviet Union, Hitler diverted millions of troops to a new front.
The Soviet Union was a target in the same way that Poland was. It was a primarily Slavic nation. In fact, it was subjected to even harsher treatment because it was communist-run.
Hitler ordered his generals to wage a war of annihilation. It was a scorched earth campaign that struck at the very heart of Russian art and culture. When news of the invasion reached the Hermitage Museum, officials cleared the crowded galleries of visitors and began the frantic evacuation of its immense collection.
We are kind of not accustomed, you can't be accustomed to wars, but we know how to behave in wars. Hermitage was evacuated during the First World War. By the way, it was also evacuated during the war with the French in the 19th century. So when Germans invaded in the Second World War, Hermitage was prepared to evacuate.
Compared to the Louvre in Paris, the Hermitage had over 4 times the number of objects to evacuate. The vast collection of the Russian Tsars included everything from paintings and furniture to porcelains and antiquities. The Hermitage also got a late start, but the White Nights of Leningrad's summer helped to make up time, as packing could go on around the clock. Within a month of the invasion, Soviet trains had carried over 1 million of the most prized treasures. But half the museum's holdings would remain in peril when the Nazi forces encircled Leningrad just weeks later. The enemy was now only 13 kilometers from the museum. It was the start of the 900-day siege of Leningrad. In the first 2 months of the siege, the Nazis fired over 12,000 shells and dropped over 60,000 bombs on Leningrad. In October, Hitler ordered his generals to wipe the city off the face of the earth. Hermitage staff and the city's artistic community took shelter in the network of cellars underneath the museum. During the first winter of the siege, 2,000 people inhabited this freezing subterranean world. Throughout Leningrad, reserves of fuel were running out, just as the days began to grow shorter and colder. Starvation set in. During November and December of 1941, 70,000 people died. Through the bitter winter, blizzard sent snow through thousands of bomb-shattered windows. And for 3 months, the starving museum workers used crowbars to chip away 80 tons of ice and broken glass that had frozen to the walls, ceilings and parquet floors of the ornate galleries. When the snow melted with the first spring, a burial squad came to the Hermitage. From an improvised mortuary in the cellar, they removed 46 corpses that had stayed frozen through the winter. The dead were taken to a plot of wasteland on the outskirts of the city that would become, over the next 2 years, the common grave for 500,000 Russian victims of the siege. From France to Russia, the whole of Europe was under attack, and alarming reports about Nazi theft and destruction were reaching art professionals at a brand new museum, far from the Hermitage.
To accept this work today is to assert the purpose of the people of America, that the freedom of the human spirit, which has produced the world's great art, shall not be utterly destroyed.
From the National Gallery of Art in Washington, a group of museum officials and academics, known as the Roberts Commission, warned President Roosevelt of a grave problem facing the Allied armies: how to save Europe without further destroying its historic buildings and cultural treasures in the process.
The primary concern was buildings and monuments, because this was the first war in which bombing was a major problem. Everybody had seen what happened in England during the Blitz, so they knew that when armies invaded that this would be a major issue.
The first invasion came in the summer of 1943, when America and its Western allies launched a massive attack against German occupation forces in southern Italy.
We had a tough time. The Germans put up a great deal of resistance, so in the process, we pretty much destroyed Italy. Many of the villages and towns were actually just leveled.
In Italy, and later elsewhere in Western Europe, some battle-hardened GIs only added to the problem of destruction. Local officials complained of Allied soldiers making off with books, coin collections, and even stuffed monkeys from a natural history museum. General Eisenhower worried that this misconduct was bringing on bad publicity, and worse, he saw that his army threatened to harm the artistic heritage of Italy. So 6 months into the invasion, he ordered all field commanders to respect monuments so far as war allows. Just 2 weeks later, Eisenhower's order was put to a severe test. 130 kilometers south of Rome, the Allied advance was blocked by a heavily defended mountain. On top of that strategic mountain stood the historic monastery of Monte Cassino.
I wasn't concerned about the monastery. I was concerned about the people trying to kill me. All the way up this mountain ridge. We have Germans at different levels, all dug in and all shooting at us.
The battle to control the mountains around Cassino became a bloody stalemate. Allied field commanders, who for weeks had held back from attacking the monastery directly, argued over its fate. And back home in the United States and Britain, parents protested that they didn't want their sons dying to save a building.
Nell'abbazia potevamo essere da 1500-1600 persone. Noi siamo andati nel monastero perché eravamo sicuri che non l'avrebbero bombardato, perché era un monumento storico per noi. Per noi era Monte Cassino, era qualche cosa, non solo per noi, ma per il mondo intero, diciamo.
Since 529, the monastery had been home to the Benedictine order of monks. During its 1400 years, it had been destroyed by earthquakes and invaders, and each time the massive complex had been rebuilt from the ashes of its ruin. Now, Allied commanders, hoping to drive the German army from the mountain once and for all, decided to bomb it.
A un certo momento non riuscivo nemmeno a respirare, le grida di dolore, le grida di disperazione, bambini che piangevano, mamma, mamma, mamma.
E sono stato un paio di ore sempre che andava, ogni squadra di aerei passava e bombardava, passava e lasciava le bombe, passava e lasciava, il cielo non si vedeva proprio, tutto coperto di aerei.
It was the most bombers the Allies had ever sent against a single building, but not one enemy soldier was killed. The German army had been around the monastery, not in it, and after the bombing, they turned the ruins into a defensive fortress. In the end, over 50,000 soldiers and civilians would die before the Allies finally broke through the German line 3 months later.
Die Abtei von Monte Cassino nach der Zerstörung durch die angloamerikanischen Luftkräfte. Nach dem Bombenangriff legten diese Schänder der europäischen Kultur das Feuer schwerer Artillerie auf die Trümmer der Benediktinerabtei. Das ist geblieben.
After the bombing of the monastery, every Allied bombing mistake was trumpeted loudly in newsreels and pamphlets with titles like The War Against Art. The Italian fascist government even issued a set of postage stamps that commemorated Monte Cassino and other historic monuments that had been destroyed by Allied bombing.
Of course, the German and Italian propaganda did have a point because things were damaged. In Milan, the Last Supper was almost lost because a bomb fell on the building where it was. And some bombs had fallen on Rome, on San Lorenzo, one of the most famous churches in Italy.
Although stray Allied bombs fell on the outskirts of Rome, the ground war bypassed the city when the German army withdrew to the north. Rome's people and ancient monuments were spared. But after Rome, perhaps no city had cause for more concern than Florence, whose museums housed the greatest artworks of the Italian Renaissance. Here, as in France, cultural officials early on had taken movable works of art to the presumed safety of country villas and castles. But the precious city itself, its bridges, its Renaissance palaces and churches, and its public sculpture, still remained vulnerable as the war moved up the boot of Italy.
Everybody was thinking that a town like Florence, that was considered a jewel of art and of beauty, that it would be a so-called open town, not to be touched by the war.
But city officials feared the worst. Unsure that the Nazis would give up Florence without a fight, they mobilized workers to build structures around the city's most important public art. The Della Robbia ceramics that adorn the first orphanage of Europe were housed in protective wooden sheds. The marble tombs of the Medici chapel were shielded with sandbags. And Michelangelo's 6 marble slaves and his statue of David were entombed in massive brick capsules.
When the Allies started bombing Italy, Florence was a difficult problem because it has all of its extraordinary monuments, but also is a very important railroad center.
With trepidation, Allied command decided to disrupt the German supply lines by sending its very best air squadron to bomb the Florentine rail depots. By now, the Army's art advisors at the Roberts Commission had begun providing special aerial photographs that highlighted for pilots and crew the important monuments they were not to hit. To this small group of young airmen was entrusted the fate of historic Florence. When the formation turned wide over the city, the great dome of the cathedral passed under their bomb sights. The entire payload dropped into a narrow sliver of railway, missing the monuments of Florence entirely. It was one of the most precise missions of the war.
Molti di noi, una grande maggioranza, devo dire, della popolazione era felicissima quando sentiva gli sbarchi e la cosa che volevamo di più era liberarsi dal fascismo. Questo voglio dirlo chiaramente. Nessuno è riuscito, neanche la propaganda più pesante è riuscita a figurare l'esercito americano come distruttore di opere d'arte. Mai.
By this time, the Roberts Commission had persuaded the army to take on art experts who would serve near the front lines, where they could salvage and protect monuments and art. Recruited into the ranks of the new Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives Task Force were young artists, historians and curators, who later would become leaders of the post-war art world. Men like James Rorimer, who would go on to run the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Lincoln Kirstein, who would found and direct the New York City Ballet. GIs called them the Venus Fixers. Later, they came to be known as the Monuments Men.
There was no one unit that was a Monuments Men's unit. They were individual officers who were put with the separate armies, and they never had enough people on the ground to do what they wanted. There were less than 200 during the whole war, and at some points there were only 12 in the front lines.
The feeling I had about doing something to salvage Western culture, it was exhilarating. Finally, we could do something positive.
We were charged with much more than we could encompass in our minds even. We had no trucks, no jeeps, nothing but our shoes, and no support of any kind from officialdom.
Here were these monuments people saying, what about the safety of this important structure? And to some of our fighters, people that had seen their buddies killed, why should they worry about that?
By the summer of 1944, the tide of the war had turned. German forces were retreating all over Europe. Along the way, they carried out acts of vindictive destruction. At 10 o'clock on the night of August the 3rd, 2 days before the German army withdrew from Florence, a series of great explosions shook the heart of the city. The New York Times would later report, Florence, as the world knew it, is no more. On Hitler's orders, the German army had blown up the city's central bridges. It took 3 tries to bring down the Ponte Santa Trinita, with its arches designed by Michelangelo. The Ponte Vecchio was spared, but thousands of yards of ancient Florence had been demolished on either side.
Mai immaginati. Il ponte alla Carraia non era bello e quindi se è saltato non è niente, ma poi quando hanno visto il meraviglioso ponte Santa Trinita spezzato in tante parti, è stato questo veramente tutto un grido di dolore in quella zona. Ecco, questo sì.
It was not only the bridges, those two main streets that go from the Ponte Vecchio into the town. Those were enormous, big, beautiful medieval towers that fell all down.
Nearly half of the best art of Florence was also gone. With total disregard for their one-time Italian allies, the German army had diverted a convoy of trucks from the front to take Michelangelo's, Botticelli's, Raphael's and every other masterpiece they could haul away.
The Germans packed things very badly, and they were moved during battle in open trucks, often in the rain, just covered up with straw. It's a miracle that they survived at all.
By now, the Soviets had stopped the invasion of their country and began to take territory back from the Germans. In the wake of the Nazi retreat, the Red Army found nothing of value left in the museums of their recaptured cities. In the suburbs of Leningrad, the treasured palaces of the Russian Tsars had been ransacked and destroyed. From the Catherine Palace, the Nazis had stripped everything of value, including the panels of the legendary Amber Room. Even the immense gilded fountains at the Palace of Peter the Great had been dismantled and transported to Germany, along with nearly 5,000 pieces of antique furniture and 35,000 works of art. Between 20 and 30 million Soviet soldiers and civilians died in the war. Thousands of cities and villages were completely destroyed. As the Red Army pushed the invaders back into Germany, Soviet leaders rallied their forces with a call for vengeance.
As the Red Army fought its way westward and invaded Germany, they seized everything that they could, from industrial infrastructure down to toilet seats. But they also seized millions of cultural objects. Stalin put trained art experts into so-called trophy brigades to track down Russian art stolen by the Nazis. But soon they were taking trainloads of German art and shipping it eastward back to the Soviet Union.
While the Soviet trophy brigades removed works of art from Eastern Germany, the Allied monuments officers were closing in on Germany from the west.
Once the monuments men got to Germany, their mission changed entirely. There was very little they could do about buildings in Germany because they were just basically all gone.
For months, Allied bombers had been attacking the industrial and urban centers of Germany. The Royal Air Force alone dropped 1 million tons of bombs on enemy territory.
Walking around among those ruined cities was very distressing. No matter how guilty their government was, to think that we had smashed those cities with our airplanes. But in the Monuments and Fine Arts section, we were trying to restore something that was worth saving.
They shifted their work to the protection of movable works of art, which they found in innumerable hiding places all over Germany.
160 kilometers inside the German border, stored among refugees living in squalor, monuments officers found their first of the hidden German museum collections. Further east, British officers discovered a cache that had already been rifled through by common thieves. And in a salt mine in central Germany, Generals Eisenhower, Patton and Bradley were called in to tour the biggest find yet. Stored along with the entire gold reserves of the Third Reich were 400 tons of art from the great museums of Berlin. Daily, the monuments men were rescuing thousands of vulnerable artworks that German museum authorities had sent away for safety. But their discovery of the Nazi plunder was still to come.
The castle of Neuschwanstein housed a great part of the art treasures stolen by the Nazis. Not content with robbing people of their freedom and their lives, the Nazis tried to make off with their symbols of culture.
Here, far from the ruined cities, the Allies finally reached the first of 3 staggering hoards of stolen art. They found Neuschwanstein Castle, packed with property taken from the Rothschilds and other prominent Jews of Paris.
It was just one room after another of paintings, household items, china, silverware. The number of objects that had been taken from the victims in France were measured into the thousands.
This was all ERR stuff that Roosevelt had notified people of. She even had, in some cases, receipts from the local shipping company that shipped it. It took us a year to empty that castle. 49 train car loads, that's a lot, all packed tightly.
My knowledge of the Holocaust started at Neuschwanstein. The taking of lives I learned much later, but Neuschwanstein, as I look back, was the start of really opening up that part of history that should never be forgotten.
Not far from Neuschwanstein Castle, American troops recovered Hermann Goering's art collection, which he had evacuated from Berlin to his mountain retreat. Monuments officers discovered the train carrying his last shipment abandoned at a railway siding, but others had got there first.
The word had got around among the peasantry that the Goering train was there and it had schnapps on it. And so people came running and went in there into the train and started taking whatever they could get. So the first ones got schnapps, and the ones that followed had to be satisfied with whatever else they could put their hands on, like 15th century paintings.
What remained after the locals looted Goering's massive collection was a logistical nightmare. Hundreds of paintings and sculptures were scattered in at least 6 different structures. Hordes of press arrived at the scene.
Goering's curator, Hofer, was making the most of this, and Life magazine was there taking his picture, and he was saying, "Oh, this is a wonderful collection we put together completely legally."
By the time Hermann Goering was arrested, he had amassed over 2,000 paintings, sculptures, tapestries, rugs, and other works of art. His collection had grown by more than 10 times since the start of the war. Now, most of it was in the hands of the 101st Airborne Division. By late April 1945, the Soviet Red Army was fighting its way through the streets of Berlin itself. In the final weeks of the Third Reich, sealed in an underground bunker, Hitler spent time every day obsessing over his architectural model for the Linz project. Often he would invite his few remaining generals in to see the model and hear about his plans for the town. Before shooting himself on April the 30th, Hitler dictated his last will, expressing his wish that the Führer Museum still be built to display his art collection after his death. On the day the Allies declared victory in Europe, the American Third Army reached a small town high in the Alps of Austria. There, hidden deep in an ancient salt mine, Hitler's art hoard was waiting in vain for its final delivery to Linz.
My trip into that mine reminded me of Alice following the rabbit down the rabbit hole into Wonderland. When we finally reached the end of our journey, I found myself gazing into the vastness of a cavern with works of art 2 or 3 balconies high.
It was cold as cold can be. And here's a GI on his knee looking at, hold your breath, the Ghent altarpiece from Belgium. It's been called the great-grandfather of all Flemish painting. It was a mountain full of art.
Among the artworks that the monument's men recovered and inventoried were Vermeer's Astronomer from the Rothschilds' collection in Paris, paintings heisted by the Hermann Goering division from Italy, and art taken from Jews in Vienna and other cities all over Europe. The mine had been fitted with wood-lined offices, restorer studios, and endless racks of art in chamber after chamber. 6,500 paintings, over 3,000 drawings and prints, 100 sculptures, and countless more tapestries, furniture, and books.
All of this accumulated beauty had been stolen by the most murderous thieves that ever existed on the surface of the earth. How they could retain the nicety of appreciation of great art and be exterminating millions of people nearby in concentration camps, I couldn't understand then, and I can't understand it today.
At last, the war was over. After 6 long years and some 50 million dead, somehow in cities all over Europe, the weary survivors found the energy to celebrate. And in Italy, Monuments Officer Dean Keller gave the people of Florence even more to cheer about. High in the Italian Alps, Keller found the stolen art treasures of Florence. Keller escorted the train that brought the Raphaels, Botticellis, and Michelangelos back to Florence. The waybill valued the shipment at $500 million and listed the contents simply as art treasures. But in post-war Germany, the monuments men were still responsible for the legacy of centuries of Western civilization. Their first task was to bring it all together at central collecting points.
When I got to Munich, the main part of the city had really lost its roofs. And it was jagged buildings everywhere. But oddly enough, the place that should have been bombed was still there, the Nazi Party headquarters. That's what turned out to be the collecting point. I had to get it ready to receive works of art in 14 days. And the idea that the Ghent altarpiece was going to be coming and the Michelangelo Bruges Madonna, that did leave a very strong impression. You had to be sure you were ready to receive them.
North of Munich, in the city of Wiesbaden, monuments men set up another collecting point just in time to receive their first big shipment.
They were 56 trucks that came over a period of 4 days, all protected by machine guns on weapons carriers and the like.
Each object had to be inspected, catalogued, photographed, and in many cases restored. Arriving at Munich and Wiesbaden were the collections of Adolf Hitler, Hermann Goering, the National Museums of Germany and Austria, and art looted from across Europe.
The 2 collecting points, probably at that time, with all the stuff they had in them, may have been the greatest museums in the world.
There are 27 Rembrandts in that collection. 27 Rembrandts. A number of Rubens paintings, Botticelli, Masaccio. And then go right down the list. Oh, Correggio's Leda. Oh, that was a beauty.
In that office on the front wall, there was a wonderful Degas that's become my favorite Degas of all. Just that office alone was worth the price of admission through World War II.
There was so much to do that you didn't have time to rejoice.
The responsibility of having these items under us really gave you cause to think. Maybe a little shaky at times, but we had to do it. There was no other way. There was nothing else to do but just do our job.
The army wanted out of the art business as soon as possible and ordered the collecting points to turn over responsibility for the tons of art to government authorities in countries from which they were taken. Bulk shipments were made from the Neuschwanstein back to France. Paintings looted from Italy returned home. And Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine made its way back to Krakow with the Weizstoss altarpiece and 27 train cars full of other Polish treasures.
It was sort of like running a movie backwards. All the train loads that had gone to Germany and to the mines and whatnot now started coming back.
But at the collecting points, there still remained more objects for which there were few surviving claimants. Ornate menorahs, silver sacramental cups, Torah crowns, and other precious objects stolen from decimated Jewish communities.
We had one whole room filled with Torahs, one on top of another like a mountain. By this time, the full recognition of what had happened in the camps had come out. We knew it, and you couldn't pass that room without almost shuddering, thinking of all the people that died in the route that Torah took to finally get to our place.
Eventually, the Torahs and religious art objects were entrusted to Jewish museums and libraries around the world. By the time the collecting points closed down in 1951, the monuments men had processed millions of items and restored much of what remained of Europe's artistic heritage. But despite those accomplishments, today, more than half a century later, unfinished business still remains in the aftermath of the cultural upheaval of World War II. In Germany, near Nuremberg, historian Ralph Rosmeisel is working to honor and restore what has survived of the forgotten Jewish culture that once thrived in the area.
Mein Job besteht darin, zu finden und Geraubtes eigentlich dann wieder zurückzugeben.
At abandoned synagogues like this one in Kronheim, Rosmeisel looks for evidence of what Jewish life was once like here.
Wir sind hier auf dem Dachboden von 1816. Und hier sind die verbrauchten hebräischen Schriften, die auf dem Dachboden deponiert wurden und natürlich in der Nazizeit vergessen. Wenn man als Christ ein bisschen was zurückgeben kann, denke ich, ist doch eine schöne Sache.
Rosmeisel recently acquired a collection of silver Torah crowns that had been passed secretly through several hands since the war.
Und das sind Rimonim, das ist ein Schmuck für die Tora-Rolle. Und das sind kleine Krönchen, die oben aufgesteckt werden mit Glöckchen dazu.
Rosmeisel is trying to track down surviving families of the original owners.
Das ist ein Unterschied dazu, dass man geraubte Ritualgegenstände als Kunstwerke ansieht oder dass man diese Gegenstände wieder in den Gottesdienst zurückführen will. Ich höre das Klingeln von jüdischen Rimonim und es erschaudert mich. Und wenn dann beim ersten Telefongespräch, wenn man weiß, das ist der Urenkel von diesem Menschen, der das gestiftet hat, und man hält diesen Ritualgegenstand an das Telefon und lässt das klingeln, dann erschauert es 10.000 Kilometer entfernt einen anderen Menschen.
While Rosmeisel works to return objects stolen from Jews in Germany, in the former Soviet Union, a different sort of cultural wound still festers. In 1995, the Hermitage Museum revealed for the first time that 74 important paintings taken from Germany by the Red Army trophy brigades were in its possession. It was the latest in a series of revelations by Russia that had stunned the art world.
While there was great excitement about the revelations concerning the trophy art, there was also an element of accusation concerning the Soviets and the Russians, what they had done with these cultural objects.
Beginning in 1949, Soviet authorities returned over 1.5 million works of art, mostly to Eastern Bloc countries like Poland and East Germany. But the returns had stopped in the early 1960s. With the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, came the first reports about secret storage rooms where thousands of trophy artworks remained out of public view. Critics in Germany and elsewhere called for the return of the art.
Keeping the trophy art is very popular in Russia. The population really supports the retention of this art, but there is no basis in international law for doing so.
Russian hardliners defiantly passed a law declaring the art to be Russian property, once and for all. But a fierce debate goes on to this day.
Не надо забывать, что Германия стояла у истоков 2 мировых войн. Германия была инициатором. Но лишь один Ленинград в блокаду потерял около 1 миллиона гражданского населения. И после этого ставить вопросы о необходимости перемещения просто, повторяю, на мой взгляд, безнравственно.
Это всегда была карта такого национал-патриотизма. Это была карта такого дурного шовинизма, но моя позиция здесь очень проста. Нужно найти цивилизованную развязку. И нужно помнить о том, что нам всем жить вместе все равно в Европе. У меня, буду знать, что у меня там в музее Пушкина висит на стенке Гальбейн, скажем, или какой-нибудь там немецкий Габема, который там, не знаю. Не восполнит эту боль от того, что мой отец пришел из-под Сталинграда беспалым, там, и хромым. Вот и вся история. А выход какой-то надо искать, ну, такой разумный, я считаю.
У нас в России нет семьи, в которой бы кто-то не погиб во время Второй мировой войны. Еще живет то поколение. Оставьте их в покое. Пусть пройдет 2-3 поколения, и тогда разбирайтесь. Сейчас невозможно решить эту проблему без кровавых слез.
Nach längeren Forschungen ist mir jetzt eben auch gelungen, Nachfahren in den Suburbs von New York. Und ich werde in einer kleinen Zeremonie diese Ritualgegenstände der Familie Weinschenk zurückgeben. Wenn man diese Gegenstände wieder klingeln hört, ich bin kein Jude, aber ich habe dann genauso Tränen in den Augen wie diese Menschen auch. Und das ist doch eine wunderschöne Geschichte. Nicht Forschung, kunsthistorisch, Silbergehalt, sondern dass wieder Leben draus entsteht. Dass das in den Herzen klingelt.
Art belongs to humanity. Without this, we are animals. We just fight, we live, we eat. Art is, it's what makes us human.
Like refugees from battle, most of Europe's art found its way home after the war. And like every soldier and civilian who lived or died, every work of art has a story to tell. Never before had art been moved, hidden and plundered on such a vast scale. Thousands of artworks remain unaccounted for. Many, the innocent victims of war, will never be seen again. But others are sure to resurface in years to come.